So, the PP-Bizon. Out of all the guns in CSGO, every category seems to have at least one underachiever.
There are more important things than comfort. Self-respect.
Although it seems a bit much to say that any one of these unfortunate weapons is completely useless, there are definitely some guns objectively better than others. Even so, many of these weapons lumped into the underused category shouldn't automatically be written off as useless or not competitively viable. In my experience, underused weapons tend to either fill a very specific niche or are just unfortunately overshadowed by better, more cost-effective alternatives. From the latter, I present to you the PP-Bizon. But what exactly about the Bizon warrants such apathy in terms of competitive usage? Surely it has some redeeming factors. Well, while it may not be completely useless, it's still the worst SMG in CSGO. As per tradition, before I get into the bulk of this breakdown discussion, we first need to take an objective look at the weapon's overall statistics. As always, I won't be presenting every little statistic, but just the ones that I find to be important and or interesting. So without further ado, let's get into some weapon statistics. Starting at $1,400, the Bizon is a mid-priced SMG, available for both counter-terrorists and terrorist teams. While obviously not the cheapest or most expensive SMG, the price alone doesn't seem to favor the Bizon over other such SMG alternatives. It's only when you take the time to research the weapon statistics that you begin to see the potential of buyer's remorse. At 27 raw damage per bullet, the Bizon registers rather low on the scale of raw damage statistics for SMGs, which in itself isn't necessarily bad. As most of you are aware, factoring in a weapon's armor penetration can either make or break a weapon in terms of total lethality. In this case, the Bizon leans towards the latter, as its paltry armor penetration of 57.5 ties with the MAC-10 for lowest AP values among SMGs. But unlike the MAC-10, the Bizon also contains a lesser fire rate of about 750 rounds per minute. While not the slowest fire rate for SMGs, factoring in the Bizon's low raw damage and terrible armor penetration, the weapon obtains the absolute lowest SMG DPS rating, scoring 325 against unarmored opponents and 187 against armored individuals. Needless to say, like most SMGs, the Bizon has a non-existent fatal headshot range for fully armored opponents, but it can actually one-shot helmetless individuals at relatively close ranges. Either way, with SMGs and specifically the PP-Bizon, it's generally safer to spray down an enemy to secure a kill, as the Bizon definitely gives you enough ammunition to do so. In fact, the biggest and probably only benefit of using the Bizon over other SMG alternatives is its absurdly large ammo capacity. At 64 bullets per magazine with 120 in reserve, the Bizon has one of the largest magazine capacities in the game, second only to the LMGs, but at a much more reasonable price point. As an SMG with an overabundance of bullets and 240 move speed, the gun seems inherently made for running and gunning while spraying and praying. But before we jump into any hasty conclusions, we first should take a peek into the Bizon's inaccuracy statistics. Now, as usual, I will be showing the Bizon's standing, crouching, and running inaccuracies alongside with the other SMGs in CSGO, so as to save some time and for ease of comparison. So, as we can see, the Bizon seems to have fairly poor inaccuracies overall, with the worst SMG standing and crouching inaccuracies, along with a rather mediocre running inaccuracy to boot. Combined with the largest SMG damage falloff of 20% at 500 units or more, accuracy in general seems to be another one of the Bizon's glaring weak points. However, its inaccuracy from firing, general recoil, and overall spray pattern aren't terribly bad, and are serviceable when spraying, for an SMG. In addition, the Bizon sneakily contains the second fastest reload and fire ready time, giving the weapon a few small benefits when unloading a hail of bullets downrange, which is a good enough segue to lead us to my next point. How do you use the PP-Bizon? Well, As we've seen, with the Bizon's relatively weak damage statistics, it actually takes a considerable amount of bullets to kill an armored enemy at even close combat ranges. Adding in its barely passable accuracy, 20% damage drop-off, and stupidly large magazine capacity, it's safe to assume that the weapon was meant to be used as a spray and pray machine in CQC. Except for very specific situations, there really isn't much of an advantage in tapping or bursting with the PP-Bizon, much less attempting to use it outside of medium to close ranges. Unfortunately, even in CQC, where the weapon should be at its strongest, the Bizon is still probably the worst SMG option to be used in a traditional dueling aspect. It's best to use the weapon as an ambush gun, or more along the lines as a fire support weapon. With 64 bullets and a relatively low SMG fire rate, you can actually sustain rather long bouts of suppressive fire, to hopefully pick off wounded opponents or hold off potential pushes. Honestly, even though many of the clips I've used today highlight my personal success with the PP-Bizon, most of it definitely comes from experienced game sense and probably a fair amount of luck. On that note, I would like to point out that I do believe the Bizon to be one of the few guns in CSGO that favors game sense over raw aiming proficiency. While of course aim always plays an important part of any weapon's success, the Bizon's terrible lethality and lack of range stress the importance of critical timing, positioning, and mobility, forcing users to outthink enemy players rather than just out-aim them. Or it could just be dumb luck. Either way, for the most part, the higher up you go in skill level, the less people tend to make stupid mistakes, and the more they tend to punish you for it. Seriously, even after my extensive use of the Bizon in competitive play, my best advice for aiming the weapon is just to aim for the chest and hope for the best. Hang a bit to the right. Keep that spray pattern tight. Get your feet on the move, and just shoot with the groove. Don't worry about the statistics, baby, cause tonight...
Know me.
It's gonna make everything alright.
Euphoria, shut the fuck up. I know that was you. I ain't even gotta look. I should send your ass back to Crenshaw Pete with his hot ass coat hangers, bitch. Would you like that?
So when should you buy a PP-Bizon? You shouldn't. I'm joking. But really, the only sensible time to buy a PP-Bizon is of course against enemy saves, as a bank building SMG. But we all know how rare those rounds seem to be in the current pistol armor meta. But if you do manage to correctly predict a round where enemies forgo Kevlar helmet, the Bizon can be useful when holding certain choke points or serving as an expensive decoy. Again, on anti-eco rounds, you're essentially gambling with your weapon and equipment selection. Buying rifles, full armor, and utility certainly increases your chance of round success, but at the cost of significant bank. Buying a shotgun or SMG may decrease your round success rate, but greatly increases the amount of money returned on a win. However, in the case of the PP-Bizon, for $1,400 you're essentially paying for a lesser SMG that can't reliably out-aim or out-duel upgraded pistols, relying heavily on superior positioning, game sense, and luck. Truthfully, there are very few situations where the Bizon outshines any other SMG, and even then, for $1,400, you would probably be better off buying a MAC-10, MP9, or UMP. As those weapons offer more utility and lethality, thus increasing your chances of round success. Such is the life of the PP-Bizon. In conclusion, I just can't endorse using the PP-Bizon in serious competitive play. Its terrible damage statistics give it the lowest SMG DPS rating for both armored and unarmored individuals. Its terrible accuracy values give it the worst standing and crouching statistics with mediocre running stats as well. Tie it all together with the worst SMG damage drop-off, and the gun is virtually useless at any range outside of 500 units. But on the bright side, it does have that ridiculous 64 bullet magazine and passable spraying statistics, giving it some big play potential. Still, for $1,400, the cost definitely outweighs the benefit, especially with better SMG alternatives. At higher competitive levels, CSGO becomes a battle of milliseconds. Stressing the importance of weapon selection, utility, and lethality. For the most part, as players' skill and aim progress, the Bizon and its usefulness, understandably, regress. Perhaps one day if the devs decide to buff the Bizon, with an increase in fire rate and maybe a decrease in cost, it could potentially see a resurgence in competitive play. But as it is now, the PP-Bizon seems like nothing more than a terrible Chinese knockoff of the superior P90. It's like if all I wanted for Christmas was a shiny new P90 Asimov, but due to budget constraints, Santa Gaben and his elves chose to gift me a PP-Bizon Osiris instead. Sure, it's better than nothing, but somehow, that's even more disappointing. But that's just my opinion. Like always, it was impossible for me to cover everything regarding the PP-Bizon. So, what do you guys think? Is it worth buying over other SMGs? And if so, when? Does it need a buff to stay competitively relevant? Or should Valve continue to focus their efforts on further destroying my eardrums and frames with its new HRTF garbage? Well, until the devs decide to change something useful, it's still the worst SMG in CSGO. Bizon. 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 Bizon.